It's time for Respect the Process, a short chat about commercial filmmaking. Here's your host, director Jordan Brady.
Oh, Helen, wonderful intro. I have missed you. I have dreamt about you, and here we are in the studio. Listeners, it is October 8th, 2024. My guest is industry veteran, PR and marketing guru, Anthony Vagnoni. Now, he doesn't spell it Vagnoni, but that's the correct Italian pronunciation. And Anthony has been around, and he's been not only in advertising, but writing about advertising and production specifically. So he offers wonderful perspectives on the challenges and opportunities facing not only up-and-coming directors, but veterans like myself. Because, look, adapt or die, folks. And it's a great chat. Thank you, Anthony. I feel like I have left you all, I've abandoned you the last month or so. And here we are, we're back. But I went from back-to-back shoots. There's actually a fourth one in there that I'll tell you about. And then we had our filmmaker retreat, our third annual filmmaker retreat out in Joshua Tree, which was just sensational and, as promised, transformational. We had a great tribe of filmmakers, and we discussed the theme of finding your voice and how to get better gigs. I did a case study of plain snippets of actual Zooms and pitches. We went on a walkabout in the Joshua Tree National Park. We had a party van. Helen, you saw it on my Instagram. The party van takes us all into the national park. We talked about budgets, which is something I don't do anywhere. And then we had our faux fire circle sponsored by True Gent. It was just a blast. And we also had Magic Mind for the filmmakers, thanks to the Magic Mind people. And you've heard me talk about Magic Mind because I started it like a year ago, doing it every morning as a shot. And that's what it is, really. It's like a mental performance shot. And let's face it, I get a lot of shit done, right? Yes, I've been lacking on the podcast the last month, but pretty consistent, working at running the retreat and the boot camp and the courses, free consultation calls with everyone who takes an online course. So my wife had suggested taking, turmeric or turmeric. I don't know how to say it, Helen. And the ashwagandha, the lion's mane, and she would pump me full of vitamins, all the vitamin B's and D's. And then we came across Magic Mind. So it's been a year plus that I've been doing it on the daily. So it is truly my daily performance, my mental performance shot. And it's like part of my routine. It keeps me focused, and as I've told you, it fights the ADD. And I told the Magic Mind people, hey, I'm going to be with a bunch of filmmakers, and they want to get shit done. So they sent us some Magic Mind, and I said, what can you do for the listeners? And they said, well, why don't we do this? This is real. Try 3 shots for free. You pay for the shipping for the 3 bottles, right? And here's the code. It's magicmind.com. You know that part. Brady Trial, one word. And then you may have to put in that code, Brady Trial. I haven't tried it because I already have it. I already have a subscription. But, the 3 bottles and you'll know, I think. But it's not like you drink it and go, and a beautiful mind numbers fly all around your head and you're a Goodwill Hunting kid and all that. It is a wake up. And then the second one, you're like, okay, I get it. And by the third one, you're like, boom, this is now supplanting my energy drink in the afternoon. I don't need the second cup of coffee. So again, it's magicmind.com/Brady Trial. And if they ask for a code, put in Brady Trial. And that's going to give you the 3 free bottles. And then you may like it. That's all I got to tell you. Bootcamp, December 14th. Commercial Directing Bootcamp will be in Los Angeles. December 14th is a Saturday, and I'll see if I can get you Magic Mind. I'll have Magic Mind at the boot camp for sure. Okay, I want to get to Anthony, but I do want to tell you, the spot I just posted today, I've been posting some Sydney beer commercials I did with Chuck Meehan, his new agency, Unlikely Story. Those got a good response. And Chuck, that's right, Helen. Chuck has been on the show like 3 or 4 times, maybe more than anybody. And then with Funko, we did a NFL fan spot that came out a few weeks ago with Steve Williams, who is just the nicest guy. He's a creative director that had his own agency, went to the Funko client side, which normally I'm like, oh, agency guy going to the client side, that's like the dark side. But Steve went to the fun side. I mean, they are just the nicest people, and they live Funko. And it's just like, I went to their headquarters and knew not to take pictures. In fact, I said, can I take a picture of that? And like in the hallway, yes, but there's top secret stuff going on all around with IP but it's just colorful and fun. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to funko.com. And I'm not pimping them, although I do have my own Funko. My grandkids have Funkos. My kids have had them for years. They're just fun. But then what I was going to tell you was, we go on this documentary I'm doing, right? And I'm with Mike Svitek, the cinematographer. We're flying home, and we're waiting to hear if we're going to shoot NFL great CeeDee Lamb. Plays for the Cowboys, my Cowboys, America's team. And I'm not a big sports guy, so I'm watching like the flight map in front of me, and Mike's watching Fox Sports News or something. And he nudges me and shows me that CeeDee Lamb has signed a $136 million contract. And I'm like, he's not going to do our commercial now. Like, why would he? And then like 3 days later, Steve Williams calls from Funko and says, CeeDee's in. He's doing the commercial. We get on a plane. We go back across the country. We shoot him in Dallas. And he was the nicest young man that I've worked with in a long time. I've worked with a lot of sports celebrities, a lot of famous actors, and this guy, I call him a kid because he's 24, 25 years old, but he's a fine young man. He was just polite, professional, on time, no big entourage, knew what was happening. Like a lot of times, I won't mention names, but initials, Kevin Hart shows up, doesn't know the script, hasn't read it. I'm still a great performer and doesn't need to read it, but CeeDee Lamb knew what was happening. He knew the script, he knew the bit, and he just couldn't have been nicer. Took pictures, and it just warms my heart when people that make it like that are still so down to earth. So kudos. I'm a Cowboys CeeDee Lamb fan for life, and if he's traded, I'll love that team too. That's the way I roll. Okay, let's get to my friend Anthony, and let me know what you think, folks. Helen, hit the tape. Tell me about your storied history in advertising and publicity of the advertising industry. Just like a brief introduction of what you do. And for the listeners, I met through Simian. Anthony and I did, you interviewed me and they put it in their blog, which was very well received by the LinkedIn crowd, which is one of my favorite audiences.
Well, I've been doing this, Jordan, longer than I like to admit. The nutshell history is that I started working at what is now Shoot and used to be Backstage for people with long enough memories.
With Bob and Roberta.
Well, very pre-Roberta.
Wow.
But Bob was there. So I started at Backstage in 1983. And believe it or not, Robert Goldrich was there then. Much younger, but he was the West Coast editor. of Backstage.
And Backstage, for the uninitiated, is still around. I think it's a website now, but that was the source of information for auditions. I mean, that's in my skewed opinion. It was for actors wanting to know what's going on in town. Where are the auditions?
It was as a friend of my ex-wife, who was an actor, referred to it, it's the Bible of the wannabe an actor. Because once you got busy as an actor and was making a living, or were making a living, you didn't need to be in Backstage anymore. Sure. But if you wanted to read the casting notices and be in the NYU student films, you had to read Backstage. It was a tabloid newspaper printed on newsprint. It came out weekly. It was sold on newsstands in Manhattan, and it had a section that covered film and video. The founders had, two cranky old Jewish men who couldn't stand each other, who were literally characters out of a Neil Simon play, had started it in the 1960s. And so the film and video section kind of grew up and became probably as important as what they referred to as legit. Mm-hmm. If you looked at Variety, when Variety covered legitimate theater, okay, Broadway and off-Broadway and regional theaters and stuff like that. So we had a legit section and we had a film and video section. I was the editor of the film and video section. I used to walk onto the subway station at 77th Street on my way to the office and see attractive young fashion models and actresses buying Backstage, taking my section out of it, throwing that in the trash, and reading the section about getting your headshots and, auditioning for the auto show at the Javits Center. So that's where I started. I worked there for a couple of years. I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. I left. I briefly did PR for my very first production company client was something called Moyer Films, which was started by Peter Friedman, who later became head of production at McCann.
Yeah, wow.
And a director named Michael Moyer, who was an art director at BBDO. And I worked for the New York festivals, and I worked for a couple of clients, but I kind of didn't fit in the PR mode. And then Backstage was sold to Billboard. Billboard brought me back in a senior editorial role. I did that for a couple of years. I quit a second time because I'm a recidivist.
Wait a minute, stop! I got to Google that. What is that word?
A recidivist.
What's a recidivist?
That's what they call the guys that they let out of prison who then commit more crimes and go back to prison.
Oh, yeah, funny.
People who don't learn from their past mistakes. Anyway, so I ended up going back to Backstage, and then I left a second time and freelanced for a while, and then I landed at Creativity. I
love Creativity.
Right. This was when Creativity was a monthly magazine that was tucked inside Ad Age. It was well respected in the creative community and largely invisible because creative people didn't read Ad Age. If anything, they read Adweek.
But Creativity in the 90s, did they also put out the DVD like Shots did? But Creativity, if you got your work in Creativity, the monthly, and you saw your name in print and screenshots, that was a big to-do. That meant you as a director in commercials had arrived.
Oh, yes. So I joined Creativity in 1990 and then became editor in January of 91. And I was editor of Creativity for about 6 or 7 years. So through most of the mid 90s. And that's kind of how I got to know that was my transition from basically covering the production side of the business to covering the agency creative side of the business. Mm-hmm. We did all sorts of things that we thought were really interesting. We were the first U.S. publication to cover Tony Kaye. We put this young kid in Florida named Alex Boguski on the cover.
Oh, wow.
We did all sorts of interesting things that was fun. And the magazine went freestanding after a couple of years, and it became its own publication. It's incredibly different now than it was then.
But let me back up a second, because that was a long intro, Tony.
Yes.
Does anyone call you Tony, or do you go by Anthony?
Thank you for asking. I am an Anthony. As my mother would point out, Tony's cut hair and make pizza. So that's and you're You're welcome to use
My
that gag.
apologies. My apologies.
You're welcome to use that gag if you like.
I just stole that. I will use that when the next time I meet an Anthony.
Right.
Anthony, when you switched from what was backstage into to working with creativity, and you said it was totally different. Like it was more about the creative side.
Right.
Was that a challenge? Was that like, finally I've arrived? Or what was that feeling when you took on a new, like you looked at the industry through a different lens?
Well, it was.
Or you don't care. The answer can be, Jordan, I don't care. It's a gig.
No. It felt different for me because you have to understand at the time that I worked for Backstage initially, it was heavily influenced by, it was what we used to call service journalism. The publishers were the kind of guys that if you were an advertiser, you got an article in the newspaper, okay? They would hand me press releases and mark on them, must run, okay? Meanwhile, if you didn't advertise, we wouldn't write about you. All right.
Gotcha.
So
pay to play, they call that, right?
Yeah, right. That's what it is now. So, it was, you were hamstrung in terms of what you did. I used to have to write articles about, companies, and then I was required to submit the article to them to read it before we published it. And it was, it's old school journalism, and it still exists. If you get the Shoppers Weekly, if you get out here where I live in Essex County, there's a magazine that shows up that's called Suburban Essex Magazine. And lo and behold, if there's an article in there for commercial directing film school, there will be an article about how wonderful commercial directing film school is. It's just a kind of puff piece, and you see a lot of it. So
advertainment, would that be what that's called? Or
it's even before that. I mean, it was literally I think it wasn't like advertorials. Advertorial,
that's the word I meant.
But those were there were rules. The American Association of Publication Editors, and I don't think I have the name of that group right, but they set down guidelines for how publications had to do advertorial content. And you see it says at the top of the page, advertisement. Okay. You still get these things. They'll be in your Sunday newspaper if in fact you get a Sunday newspaper.
Yeah. Explain to the audience what a newspaper is.
There you go. It's this thing that comes out once a week and you wrap fish in it. Or it comes out once a day, I should say.
Yeah.
So what was nice about being a creativity is we were no longer required. Advertising age is a completely different animal. It's a legitimate news publication and always has been. So it wasn't influenced by advertisers. We wrote about what we wanted to write about. We wrote about what was important. We wrote about good work. We wrote about people doing interesting things. And it was I felt free. I could now, in the meantime, I've always paid attention to commercials. And even when I was a little kid, I'll tell you, they set me up one day with lunch with Lee Clow. I had never met Lee Clow. I knew him as this legend from the West Coast. And I think it was a period of time the Chiat wanted to take a higher profile. And so they would schlep Lee to New York to meet with, potentates. And they deemed me to be one. So we went and had lunch. And it was the weirdest lunch in the world. He was kind of interesting guy, this sort of surfer dude. And I was telling him how I, grew up listening to commercials. And then out of nowhere, for reasons I can't understand, I sang for him the jingle for Eddie Leonard sandwich shops. And if you grew up in the DC area, you remember the radio jingle for Eddie Leonard sandwich shops. It was a little jaunty thing. And I just said, yeah, I remember this. And I sang this jingle for him. And he sat there. He didn't say a word. He nodded his head. And then he sang for me a jingle for some sort of some shop that he must have known from growing up. And so we bonded briefly on radio jingles. But
by the way, jingles to this day are one of my favorite things. And as soon as you said that your father was a glass repairman, in my head, I was singing Safe Light Repair, Safe Light Replace.
Yes, of course. And Safe Light, by the way, bought my father's auto glass shop.
Oh, my goodness. It's funny because when you said my dad is just an old auto guy, I was like, well, that's a pretty important job there, Anthony. And then the Safe Light thing is, and I was like, well, I don't want to bring that up because maybe they, bought him out or who knows. And turns out that's the case.
Yes. So the whole creativity thing back then, it was great. We lost money, but it was monopoly money. It was just the way they cooked the books at Cranes. But Cranes was the publisher of Ad Age and our publisher of Creativity. But it was a great job. I got to meet all kinds of people. We did interviews with fascinating directors. We wrote about print. We wrote about graphic designers. We wrote about photographers. It was literally a very, very fun job. And to this day, I don't know exactly why I left it, but I did. I was going to quit and go work for a very well-known TV commercial production. At the time, he was a rep, and now he's an executive producer. And he and I were going to go into some business together. And at the last minute, I got cold feet. And when I went and told my people at Ad Age that I was thinking of leaving, they said, well, you don't need to do that. Why don't you move up to the mothership and we'll make you a senior editor and you can write about creative trends for Advertising Age.
See
and
what happens when you say no, people sweeten the pot. When you say you're leaving, they go, whoa, whoa, whoa. But if you don't advocate, this is a lesson for a filmmaker listening, a creative at an agency. Like when you self-advocate and decide that you want to move on, they'll try to pull you back in. This is just like Tony Soprano.
Yeah. So it's funny. They moved me over to Ad Age and I became the feature guy. Remember doing front page articles on people like Spike Lee and what he was doing in the advertising world. We did a huge article on the role of the global creative director, which is funny because some of these concepts and story ideas are still kind of relevant today. So this was late 90s now, almost, butting up upon the early aughts. I left the magazine at the beginning of 2000 to go to work for the president of Young and Rubicam in one of those jobs that, you immediately regret taking. And during that period of time, I hid under my desk like George Costanza did when he was working for the New York Yankees. But it wasn't a complete and total loss because I put a deck on the back of my house as a result of the Y&R job.
Sure.
But it was just a career misstep. And I regretted it immediately. And I lobbied to get my old job back.
But wait, what was the difference between the mothership at Ad Age and the creative work you'd done from Creativity up to that point? Like, what was your thinking going to Y&R, which I think is one of the oldest agencies in the U.S. or was before joining VML or whatever they're called now? What were you thinking? Like, oh, if I go in house, it'll be easy. It's great money, and I'll write about all the clients and creative campaigns that we're doing.
It was the money. I had gotten divorced. I had 2 small kids. I had a mortgage. They doubled my salary, which wasn't hard to do when you came from publishing.
So if they doubled your salary and you were just divorced, you were basically making a little less than you were before.
No. Well, actually, it worked out well, but
I kid.
The transition from Creativity to Ad Age was very interesting because suddenly Advertising Age looks at everything from the prism of the advertiser. Okay. The way we used to describe the trade pubs back then, and again, still relevant today, is that Adweek was a trade publication for the ad agency business. Mm-hmm. And Advertising Age was a business magazine about marketing, of which ad agencies were a part, but not the whole.
Can you double click on that? Because a lot of listeners right now are filmmakers that are into commercials, either big time or they're dabbling, or they're filmmakers that want to get into commercials. And even the creatives that are listening and actors, I think not everyone understands that advertising is it's not even the majority subset under the marketing umbrella. For instance, I went to a marketing convention for Popeye's Chicken once. The advertising component was 45 minutes out of a 3-day convention. And the guy who was in charge of the marketing on the cups and wrappers of food that ended up in the trash, and he wanted to put a message on that because they found their patrons didn't use trash cans. So they put coupons on the trash. Like he got an equal 45 minutes.
Right. So, that's when you start to look at, if you're a filmmaker, if you're a commercial director, and I think what you really want to be able to do, the key here is recognition and credit. And that's always the challenge. It's particularly the challenge if you fall into the category of quote unquote vendor. Okay. So, big advertisers, for example, by and large see no upside in letting a production company put out a press release that they just shot a fabulous Huggies campaign. If anything, there's risk. There's an opportunity for somebody in the press release that you don't see or approve to say the wrong thing. Like, yes, we did shoot it in Romania. Well, wait a minute, they've got a despot. What are they doing over there? So, it's just a problem. And if you look at the avenues for getting your work promoted, they're limited. There never were a lot, and now there's probably a good way to look at it is that there's fewer. So, typically what gets written about in the ad ages and the ad weeks of the world is work that, for whatever reason, rises above. It used to be that, if the focus would be on, okay, it's work that runs in the States. Now it's all over. So you can open up, your email and look at the creativity, daily and see some insurance spot from Norway getting the lead article. What relevance does it have if you're shooting commercials in LA?
Sure.
Zero.
Chocolates from Johannesburg agency.
Yes, exactly. Okay.
Which, by the way, Anthony, I think it's important as a filmmaker to tap into as many resources as possible that do have a global spin, and not because of the web, not because of globalization of content and everything, just because as storytellers you're exposed. It's a great way to get exposed to other ways of telling stories.
Well,
like
sure.
If you spend 12 minutes watching like a Japanese commercial, you will approach comedy differently in your spots.
No doubt. And if you want your comedy to become even more whacked, you watch commercials from Thailand.
Thailand is amazing. Like there's a guy, well, I won't go into it. I can't describe it. Maybe I'll post some. But yeah, I just wanted to say that I love the resources that are available without a paywall, where you can click and watch spots. But continue. I derailed you there.
Well, back in the day, okay, if you wanted to see unusual work from different parts of the world, or from different regions for that matter, you had to go to an award show. There was no internet, there was no YouTube. Magazines like Creativity would write about wacky commercials from this agency in London called BBH, but there was no way to see these things. And so, now we're overwhelmed. But if you're a filmmaker, you're always looking for ideas and scenes and techniques that you can apply to your own work, i.e. steal. You remember that great technique that was in vogue a number of years ago, which was, the motion freezes, but the camera perspective changes. Okay. And there was never a universally accepted term for that. I've heard it described as frozen moment, because it was, I think, first used by Jonathan Glazer in a Nike spot called Frozen Moment. But it was also referred to as still array photography, where there would be sometimes a whole rack of still cameras would fire in sequence as the action would happen. So I wrote about that for Ad Age, and I can't tell you how many people called up and asked for that story. I got a phone call from a producer at World News Tonight at ABC who wanted to borrow the show reels because they were going to pitch that as a story. Advertising has a new look today. It's still, so everybody's looking for a different technique, a different angle, a different perspective, or different view. And you get that from looking at other people's work.
I
So
mentioned earlier that I think it was Shots had these DVDs. Like there was one on Spike Jonze, Michel Gondry,
yes,
I maybe Michael Bay.
in its early incantation, they were one of the first publications that would. This was long before they were, because Shots has been bought and sold numerous
Yeah.
times, and it's now merged with Source Creative, and it's which and that package Source, Shots, and Slate. They were one of the first, if not the first, publication to come out with an attached CD tucked into the magazine, or bound into the magazine, we should say, that
Oh,
you
when
could
I
pop
had
into.
my first spot on there in
Yes,
that showcase, oh, I felt like I got an Academy Award.
I remember going to visit an agency creative director at a little boutique in Chicago, who said, "You know what's a really neat idea is this," and he pulled a copy of Shots magazine out from under his desk and took out the CD. And we got to thinking about trying to do the same thing. And it's fraught with all kinds of issues back then, because you were basically selling copyrighted work that you didn't own,
Right.
which to a certain extent every award show in the world has done by selling their greatest hits CD, right? The best of the one show.
This was the only way to see stuff. And
Right.
I wonder because really the clients own the work.
Correct. But that's another story. We're getting into
Yeah.
this whole rights issue. Listen, there has been a lively industry, side hustle, so to speak, of buying and selling work that you don't own. And everybody just sort of accepts it. It's just how it's done. But I used to go to Cannes in the 90s. I went like 10 years in a row. And people say, what was it like? And it's like, it's nothing like it is now. It's a completely different sort of organization and a completely different show. But people would sit in the screenings. You could spend 3 hours watching automotive commercials. And that's where you would go to soak in stuff from all over the world. But other than that, you would go to an award show and you would go to the Clios and you would see funny commercials from Minneapolis, from little agencies in Minneapolis like Fallon, McGallagher, Rice, for little tiny advertisers that had no bearing on anything. But it was a great way to see technique. It was a great way to see gags. It was a great way to see directors' work. And a lot of directors built great reputations back then on, quirky little ads for little tiny agencies. Everything's different now. Everything's harder. I think if you're a director coming up, the thinking is, listen, you participate with the showcase that they do at the Alliance of Independent Reps. You have an advertising film directing school. Part and parcel to the skills is the marketing of yourself. Okay, which in a heartbeat, and which is really the difficult thing to do.
It's
Getting your
become
work in
more
front of the right.
important to break in. I mean, once you're established, I don't think you can sit back and let the boards flow your way.
It,
But even that's becoming a little more like Tom Kuntz, who's one of my favorite comedy directors, did this podcast after 4 or 5 years of badgering him. And he was recently on a panel, and then I saw he had a profile, I think, in Little Black Book. And I was like, and he was like, hey, it's very competitive now. Like I write my own treatments. He was, whereas 10 years ago, I don't think someone like him would care.
Correct. He wouldn't, because there was the steady board flow. There's always been a small subset of people in the business who do not have to hustle for work. The Brian Buckleys of the world right now.
Sure.
I would say the David Shanes.
King of comedy.
Yes. Whoever the top people are at Smuggler and MJZ, the rest of the world is scrapping and fighting for smaller and smaller bits of gristle. And it's, I don't want to turn people off about it, because I think it's an interesting opportunity. I also work for AICP, and AICP just published a study that they commissioned back in November of last year. I urge all of you folks out there in podcast land to go to the AICP website and look up the craft and commerce study and read it. It's 70 some pages.
Oh my goodness.
It's a deep dive into where the business came from, where it is right now, and where they see it going. And it's going to be a different world, the pie will have smaller slices, but more slices.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the key is to figure out where, you fit into that matrix.
Now I'm
And
there. I'm on their site, and it's called. Say what it's called again.
it's craft and commerce. It's opportunities in the for marketing in the moving image. I think that's the full name. And it's
Oh
on
yeah,
their
craft and
homepage.
commerce opportunities for marketing in the motion image.
Yes, there you go. And I urge you to take a look at it because it's nothing like this has actually been done before. Something of this depth and this breadth, that 20 plus interviews with industry professionals, an AICP confidential member survey, a review of published material, what's been written about advertising and where it's going. All of it looked at it through the prism of production and post-production. So it's good reading. It's worthwhile reading, for anybody, even if you're just coming into the business. If anything, you should take a look at that because this will give you some history and background as to where the business came and how it's changed and why it's changed.
What's the cliff notes? What's the takeaway? What's the elevator pitch when I option this to make it a movie?
I would say, buy yourself a Safe Light franchise. No, I'm sorry. Just kidding.
Safe light repair, safe light replace.
No, it's listen, all these newfangled things that are out there represent opportunities. But the nature of how the work is structured, the kind of fees associated with it, the deliverables, people in post-production already know this because they're at the bottom of that funnel, so to speak, or farther down in the funnel. They're seeing budgets stretch. They're seeing jobs come in that now require X number of deliverables versus, one deliverable.
27. The versions make it like one spot with a 15-second lift and a 10-second lift could be with 9x16, 16, 9, 1x1, and some other cut. Could be 27, 28 versions.
Sure.
Of one script.
Yes. So, finding your role in that is the challenge for up and coming directors. And that's on top of creating your own vision and your own voice and your own style. That's, beyond the pale of just executing the work. So, this is what reps are for. This is what executive producers are for. This is why creative people should always partner with business side people who are just as smart as them, if not smarter, who are good at the things they're not good at. Okay. And that yin and yang is something that I'm sure you know about, having run your own company and having been a roster director at somebody else's company. Okay. So, and, again, when you get quasi-established, i.e. you're making a living doing this, then it's really about thinking about what kind of work do you want to do? What categories and genres, working backwards, saying this brand appeals to me. It reflects my values. I think I could add something to its narrative thread, so to speak. And then finding out how to get involved with them, whether it's their agency, it could be with their PR agency. Remember, PR agencies aren't in some respects, signatories to DGA and SAG contracts, and so they can work in different ways. So instead of going to BBDO, you go to Edelman.
We did spots this year with Finn Partners out of Detroit, who acted as, they're traditionally marketing and PR, but they have sort of an in-house agency unit, the nicest, most creative people, and we did the spots for them and packaged based on what you're saying. We had to adjust, and we packaged the post. We did the animation at the ending, and it was all fine and dandy. But it was lower than what you would have spent 3 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago.
Yep,
it was challenged, and the fact that it was that they're not a signatory or anything didn't affect the production. Like, I'm in the Directors Guild and my shoots are DGA shoots, and that's what we did. That's an added expense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a choice. Like, actors now are deciding to go FICOR if they're SAG,
Right.
which means they can work union and non-union. And there are directors that have gone FICOR, so they can work non-DGA jobs and DGA jobs. I don't know a lot about it, but I know a handful of people that I bid against have done it. And I think that's a sign of the times.
I don't know if your audience knows what FICOR means, but you may want to explain that little acronym to them.
To me, it means, like, for the DGA, as I understand it, you're still a member. You still pay into your pension, and you pay for the health. You don't get a vote as a member, and you don't get the free movies.
Right.
And you can't go to the award show.
There you go.
And that's okay, because the movies are all streaming by the time.
Exactly.
You know, I go every Saturday or Sunday with my wife. Like, we love seeing it. And the Q&As, like, it's almost worth it to be DGA just to see two Academy Award winners talking, or right, to see Martin Scorsese talk about how they got the money for Flowers of the Killer Moon. Like, it's an invaluable, like, just way to soak up the real thing going on. And I'm just a simple commercial director.
Right. Just a humble commercial director.
Humble commercial. Well, I'm not that humble, but Anthony, when you say, like, you get to a level in your career and you find products or brands that you want to be involved with, I think now more than ever with purpose-driven advertising, that is a possibility.
Yep.
I have a thing I'm trying to work out with family farms, and I'm short of manifesting this. I've put this opportunity out there and went to the agency, went to the brand, and I'm trying to do some sort of project because it speaks to me. I'm not a farmer, but I come from that. I believe in that purpose. At the same time, I've famously gone on record as saying that I would do a commercial selling cigars to orphans if the script was right and the budget was okay.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, just to circle back to wherever it was that we started, I ended up leaving Ad Age after 9/11, along with a lot of other people. And, got a phone call from a friend of mine who's a rep, Andy Arkin of blah, 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 asking me if I would help one of his companies with their PR. And I thought, nobody's offering me anything else, so sure. And that was Quiet Man. And I started working with them. And it kind of took off from there. And so I've been doing production company PR. I've done work for some agencies, but the list of clients, my list of ex-clients is quite august, I might add. I've worked for just about everybody. I've worked for award shows. I've worked for production companies. I've worked for post houses. I've worked for music companies. I've done agency PR.
What's your favorite?
It's hard to say. I like doing this because it's relatively clean work. There's no heavy lifting. I like helping people kind of get their story out. It's not hard to do to place a PR piece about Jordan Brady in shoot, but you don't have the time to sort it out. So you'd hire somebody like me. The quote unquote PR business for production and post-production companies has changed. It's shifted a lot from a retainer type of relationship where you pay a PR person every month and you do a call with them once a week and tell them what you're working on and can we get into this? And I have a great idea for a thought leadership viewpoint article. And, I want to judge the one show and all these different things that a PR person does.
To more one-off, right?
A lot of project work. And I always took on the project work. I didn't turn it down. And I did that for a couple of reasons. I believe firmly that you get one opportunity to say no to somebody. And after that, they don't call you a second time. I've had the benefit of working from home for a long time. So my cost structure was low.
And you got that deck.
Yes, I had the deck. Well, actually, I sold that house. But I'm married. My wife makes a decent amount of money in the legal industry, and she's not in our world. And so I have a little bit of a luxury there, which not everybody has. And I just think that it's how the business goes. It's
Well,
like you
plus
don't want to have.
yeah, plus you hit it and quit it.
Right.
Like
Exactly.
you're more aligned with my world.
Right.
Like because directing commercials, and there are exceptions. Like I've done retainers for like 10 spots in a year one time. I did with Draft FCB for back when Kentucky Fried Chicken. We would do the same 3 guys every 6 weeks.
Yep.
So we made a package deal, which to me is the holy grail. Like it was so fun that way. But short of that, it's a new project every, let's say, month or 6 weeks. And you can give the project 140%. And when I mentioned the packaging of spots with post and animation with Finn, that was for True Earth. It's a their whole mission is to reduce single-use plastics, plastic jugs and things like that. So that's aligned with me and my goals and my family's goals personally. But under the auspices of the topic of project work versus like being a staff director for True Earth, I would rather be a mercenary and give it 140% and bring all the knowledge that I've gotten from other campaigns and other products and pour it in, be done and hand it off and let people do what they do. I think it's more effective and more powerful that way. And I talk to a lot of filmmakers, many whom have in-house directing gigs at a company, a service or product, not Safelite, but a similar like lawn care. There's a lawn care company. And if you're a younger filmmaker, that's the greatest job in the world. You're shooting all the time. You're not competing against Brian Buckley to do the funny lawn care spot. You're handed that assignment.
Yep. And
go ahead.
There's a lot to be said for being able to work regularly. It's funny because feature directors that got into commercials, and I did a lot of those articles over the years announcing that so-and-so is, now available for TV commercials. And one of the reasons they liked it was that it was quick in and quick out, and it kept them shooting.
It was a sorbet, creative sorbet from the movie.
Right.
And they were shooting between setting up a project that might take 5 years between the new writer, the studio, she got fired, he came in, he's an asshole, he's taking it over to Fox. Fox is sold to Disney.
Yeah, you need to exercise those skills. You need to keep them sharp, and you don't do that by having development meetings. So, if it's again talking about the kinds of opportunities that young filmmakers could find, a staff job at an in-house department is not such a bad thing to do. It used to be the kiss of death. If you did it, that meant you weren't good enough to make it as a roster director at an established production company. I wouldn't even think about that now. I would think, good, if State Farm has an in-house division and you want to shoot little, Jake from State Farm pool outs, do it.
I just sent a couple weeks ago, I sent out an in-house job for in-house directing gig for a mattress company. Like you buy it online, they ship it. And it turns out my wife has that mattress. She goes, that's the mattress in the bedroom.
There you go.
And I'm no stranger to that. So I said, wow, that's a quality product. And sent it out to my mailing list from the film school, right? And said, hey, look, I don't have a dog in the fight, but a friend of mine told me about this gig. And I said it 2 minutes ago. I recommend that a young filmmaker get that gig and get your 10,000 hours or at least 7,000 hours. Even if you shot the same thing over and over again with an iPhone, you'd be learning. And that's a bad example. They have nice equipment, these in-house things. They have an editor. They have a creative team. You're on the phone when they hire the real director, air quotes, to do the bigger budget thing.
Exactly. And the other thing that's interesting is you toss out a mattress company. There's no such thing as a bad category anymore. There's great creative work off offbeat, funny, interesting, creative work done for almost any kind of category that's out there. I mean, Mattress Firm is a retailer of mattresses here on the East Coast. They hired some hipster New York agency and some big director to do these weirdo TV commercials about, do you get a decent night's sleep? Nonetheless, it got written up in Creativity. It got covered in Ad Age and Ad Week, and there you go. One thing that's really important, I want to make this point, is that a lot of times your work will get covered, but you won't. Okay, so if there's a
what do you mean? You mean, I know that in the advertising magazines and a step above that, the marketing advertising, like if it's the top 5 auto spots of the week in Ad Forum, which is part of, I think, Ad Week or one of them.
It's Ad Forum is no. Ad
That's
Forum
Creativity.
Is independent.
They won't put the director. It'll be
right.
You got to click a few times to find production. Production is a vendor, as you said earlier.
Right.
So go ahead. You just so listeners understand that just because you see your spot in a magazine doesn't mean they're going, oh, this is Jordan Brady's spot. Correct. Now, God willing, they see the spot and go, that comedy must be by Jordan Brady. I know his point of view.
It's got that Jordan Brady look. And look, there's his cameo, just like Hitchcock.
Yes.
Anyway, it then becomes incumbent upon yourself to associate yourself with that work. Easier to do now that there are things like Instagram and LinkedIn that let you do it, and you see it constantly. Thrilled to be a part of this campaign.
Right.
Pop in the link, because that's how you have to do it. That means you need to be actively promoting, and scouring the waterfront. If you're a director of a certain level, cough up the $250 a year and have the goddamn Ad Age and Ad Week subscriptions so that you're not blocked by a paywall, so that you can see what they're writing about, so that you can draw connections between people and brands and agency assignments and who's working on what. Again, this may not be something that directors themselves want to do because most of them don't want to get into the nitty-gritty weeds of selling themselves.
If I'm reading between the lines, Anthony, we're coming of the age, and I haven't read the AICP thing yet because we've been chatting. That would be so rude. But I feel like it's not the wild, wild west, but there's a gold rush of smaller veins of gold and silver to tap into that requires the filmmaker to push her stuff a little harder. Like that's where it's even if you're on a roster, you're at a production company and they've got, if it's Brian Buckley who owns the company and he's the big purple gorilla and you sign to that roster, you might be like a yellow kangaroo. And you as the yellow kangaroo might have to hop a little harder and work and talk to the EPs and the reps and Brian himself. I've never met him. He seems like a fabulous guy, and I'm probably his number 2 fan. But I would think that you would have to make your own noise at any company that you're at if you're not the purple gorilla.
Absolutely. And just as a quick aside, we put Brian Buckley on the cover of Creativity when I was the editor. Bada-boom.
You discovered him.
No, he was already somebody then, but he wasn't a director then. It was Buckley DeCircio. He had an ad agency.
Oh, that's right.
Yep. We did an article on all the hot little New York boutiques, and we called it the New York Brat Pack. And we had Gary Goldsmith on there of Goldsmith Jeffrey, and I think Donnie Deutsch too. Anyway, I'm getting off the topic.
Different podcast.
Yes, exactly. A different podcast, an old gray-haired, long-toothed podcast. Just to interrupt for a second, Jordan, I actually have a call at 2:00. So
we're at the home stretch. I got two more questions.
I wanted to not jump off on you, before we were completely done. Anyway, continue. What were your questions?
My last question is sage-like advice. It doesn't have to be sage advice, just in the arena for the new filmmaker or even the working filmmaker in the upcoming couple of years with everything, because you read the report, you were part of the report. You're interviewing directors and agencies. What some advice that we could be doing? And number one, I think you've told us, read the trades, watch other work, maybe hire Anthony for a project to do a little PR and be on Instagram.
You've kind of summed it up. I think there's one other thing that's missing here, and that is that because people have ready access to cheap tools to be creating your own content.
Yes.
Turning yourself, using your social channels into a way to talk about what you think about things and where you see things going, and creating short little funny things. Now, I know the guys at Please Don't Destroy have the backing of SNL, but the little short films that these guys do are hilarious. And so, listen, anybody can create if your concept's good, and that means if you know funny or clever people who aren't particularly skilled at making images, partner with them, and become their visual translators, just like, Keegan-Michael Key was Obama's anger translator.
Right.
You can be the guy that takes their ideas and puts them on film or video, but have your own social voice. Create your own content as much as you can. The old days of doing, a short film could be onerous for an up-and-coming filmmaker. Now it's not so hard. And the ability to create your own content, be it purpose-driven, be it of an emotional angle, be it comedy, be it a social take on a current trend or topic, that kind of stuff just helps turn you into a more fully developed creative voice and creative personality.
By the act of doing it, and the awareness that you're gaining if the shit hits. ABC, right. Always be creating.
That's right. Coffee is for closers. Anyway, so that's my topic. That would be my biggest tidbit, because you never know when this shit hits. You're absolutely right. You just never know when some weirdo thing that you put up on the internet, who wants to be the commercial directing version of the Hawk Tuah girl? Okay.
Right.
So that's sort of what you're looking for. It was a definition of what.
Do you have daughters? I have daughters.
I do.
I would not. I just was talking to my daughter last night about that. Like, don't be famous for that.
Right. No, right. My girls are 31 and 34, and I don't, I would never ask them what they thought of the Hawk Tuah girl. But the point is, it's the definition of what is viral, something that takes off on its own and takes a life of its own. It's 1 in a million. I agree. But unless you all you need is $1 in a dream, as they used to say at the New York Lotto ad campaign. So, get yourself out there. And anybody ever wants to talk to me about any of this stuff, by the way, I take all phone calls. So
bonus question before my last question, and I know you got a couple minutes here. When they click on your name, Vagnoni. Did I get it right? Right. Vagnoni. Yes. Anthony Vagnoni. Where's it going to take them? Your LinkedIn page, a website?
My LinkedIn page. I actually don't have a website and haven't had one in a million years.
You don't need it.
I don't need it. People call me up out of the blue and say, "Can you do this?" And I go, "Sure." So done deal, No, I'm happy to talk to anybody. What I'm going to be doing is I'm kind of scaling back my PR work with Simian and with AICP and all of the over the transom things I do. I've lined up to do some volunteer work with foster kids here in Essex County, New Jersey.
Wonderful.
And I'm going to be watching my granddaughter, who is 5 months old.
Mazel tov.
Yes. So I'm sort of setting myself up to have some things to do in my semi-retirement. And we'll go from there.
Well, thank you for being on the show. This is the last question. The show's called Respect the Process.
Yes.
And so we end with, what does that mean to you?
You don't have to get it fangled in any way. It means exactly what it says. So, be aware of, be cognizant of, be introspective about how things get done. And how things get done could be simply how you formulate a concept or an idea how a commercial gets made, how a promotion gets happened, how a career advances, almost anything. Think about there's a point A to point B element to every transaction that happens in our industry and in our lives. Be aware of what it takes, be aware of who contributes to making the process happen, and then be appreciative.
Thank you for this chat. I've learned a lot. I'm going to put the link to your LinkedIn in the blog if you're listening on iTunes, Apple, Spotify, whatever. And Anthony, thank you so much for that Simian article. That was great to chat then, and I was quite flattered.
Very good, Jordan. I was happy to do it. We will talk again soon, my friend.
I got a project I want to hire you for.
Let's talk.
Okay, thanks, here. Man. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Oh, I love that chat. We all learned something, didn't we? About the industry and about ourselves. Remember, Bootcamp is December 14th in Los Angeles. That's a Saturday. If you've taken an online class like my commercial directing masterclass or Shadow Online, you know you get $100 off. So hit me up for the code, but I'll just tell you, it's Jedi.
True Gentleman Industries. We make commercials.
Commercial Directing Film School's mission is to help filmmakers direct commercials professionally. With online courses and in-person boot camps, we demystify the process to get you to the next level, all taught by your accessible mentor, filmmaker Jordan Brady.